though you walk alone. Why court approval once the road is known? Let come who will, but if they all turn home, the goal still awaits you. Go on alone.
Follow your dream, though it leads towards unknown. Life's but a shadow, once some dreams have flown. What if in cry, your dream is not your own? Your soul knows the answer. Go on alone.
Give life your heart, bless everything that's grown. Fear not the loving, all this world's your own. Make rich the soil, but once the seed is sown, seek freedom, don't linger. Go on alone. Walk like a man, even though you walk alone. Why court approval once the road is known? Let come who will, but if they all turn home, the goal still awaits you. Go on alone. Go on alone. Go on alone.
So today's reading is from the Essence of the Bhagavad Gita, just a small book. O Arjuna, make him alone with all eagerness of your heart your refuge. By his grace, you will attain the uttermost peace and find shelter for all eternity. Thus has wisdom, the most secret and sacred of all secrets, been given to you by me. Reflect on it, then do as you feel to do. And here's Swamiji's commentary, Master's commentary. We come now to that part of the 18th chapter, which has made the Bhagavad Gita not only the most instructive, informative, and inspiring, perhaps of all scriptures in the world, but also the best loved. Krishna has expounded truths more clearly, exhaustively, and convincingly than divine truth, ever one and the same everywhere, has ever been explained before, and has done it so succinctly and so wonderfully that no thinking person surely could fail to determine to give his whole life to the quest for God. It is marvelous that, after this exposition so far of nearly 700 verses, during which Krishna has set forth persuasively every human being's need for God, he still could end by saying, "Now then, do as you feel." Om, Om, Om.
This is from Whispers from Eternity. Come to me as Krishna, the divine cowherd. O Krishna, Lord of Hindustan, I sorrowed by the lonely Jamuna river, where thy flute notes thrilled the air and led lost calves to their divine home. O lotus of love, musing on the sad absence of thy delusion-dispelling eyes, I saw thine invisible spirit take form, frozen by my devotion's frost. Thy divine body of sky-blue light walked with feet of eternity on the banks of my mind, planting there the lasting footprints of divine realization. I am one of those lost calves which followed thy flower footprints on the shoals of time. Listening to the melody of thy flute of wisdom, I now follow the middle path of calm activity by which thou hast led many through the portals of their dark past into the eternal light. Since all souls belong to thy fold, whether we move forward, are sidetracked, or are hemmed in, unmoving, in the fogs of disbelief, O divine Krishna, lead us back to thy enfolding shed of everlasting freedom. O Krishna, thou reignest supreme on the heart throne of all those who know thy love. I wanted to continue this thought that Dharmini started us on how the very end of the Gita is really so touching, so sweet, so beautiful, and it really adds to everything that has already been said so far, this dimension of sweetness, just as Swamiji explained, as Dharmini read. Again, in the 18th chapter, Arjuna asks Krishna, basically, could you tell me one more time everything that you've just said? And so, which, is actually very understandable. You can imagine after about 655 slokas, you might be like, I'm starting to forget the first one. Maybe you could give me a summary at the end. And that's what the 18th chapter begins with. So it's beautiful. So if you ever feel like, gosh, I'd like to read the Gita, but after about chapter 3 I sort of pass out, then just jump to chapter 18, read that so you can get the summary of the whole thing. And then you can go back and read things more carefully, more deeply. But remember again this very precious ending to the Gita. Krishna continues, again, hear now my supreme word, the most secret and sacred of all, because you are dearly beloved by me. I offer it now for your highest benefit. Krishna's words to Arjuna, Swamiji says, here are nectar sweet. Is everyone, however, so dearly loved by God as to be deemed worthy of receiving the Lord's concern for his highest well-being? It's a good question. The answer is yes. All are loved equally by God. You see, this is what happens all the time. We can feel that, well, I'm sure we're all loved equally by God, but I think that one is loved more equally than I am by God. Or if God knew the kinds of things that I've done, he certainly couldn't love me as much as, even the masters. Master was asked this responded to this question of a disciple. He said, remember, God loves you just as much as he loves me, as much as he loves Krishna, as much as he loves Jesus Christ. Everyone he loves the same, and meaning to the ultimate. So if we ever feel less loved by God, it is not because of God. It must be added, however, that if one would have proof incontrovertible of that love, he must have a heart pure enough to receive it. A cup turned upside down cannot receive nectar, which otherwise might be poured out, filling it to the brim. This is something Master said repeatedly too. Don't hold the cup of your heart upside down. Then Divine Mother's love can't fill it. And he says, imagine a story in which a young man is born to poverty, perhaps in a city slum among degraded people, with little opportunity for schooling because he must work to support his widowed mother and younger siblings. At night he studies hard and becomes fit at last to obtain good employment in a large company. He rises in the ranks of that company and is finally made a vice president. At those heights he meets the boss's daughter, they fall in love, and with the boss's blessings get married. Later, the boss dies, the young man inherits his position and also his palatial home. At the end of such a story, wouldn't the reader exclaim with deep satisfaction, what a beautiful story? Now, imagine another story. A young man raised in a wealthy home, joining a large company, and without any obstacles before him, becomes a vice president and marrying the boss's daughter. Wouldn't it end by the young man's inheriting the boss's position and moving with his wife into the boss's palatial home? Quite possibly so. But even more possibly, the reader would have closed the book much sooner with a yawn and would never find out what happened in the end. The cosmic drama needs suspense, excitement, at times terror, at other times thrilling beauty. Man needs to feel that the ending to it all is highly uncertain and may for him prove disastrous. Only thus will his interest throughout hold him on the edge of his seat. Every soul's journey is unique. It is filled with uncertainties, with sorrow mingled with joy, with hope mingled with despair, with triumph mingled with crushing defeat, with dark doubt as to whether life has any meaning at all, followed by the discovery of human love, of success, of history-making knowledge, of undreamed-of power, of joyful laughter, followed by heart-wrenching tears. If man could know through this long journey that God's love was always with him, deeply, eternally, unconditionally, he might well preen himself on that good fortune, grow cocky, and never learn the attitudes absolutely necessary for entering into and becoming one with that love. He must learn to empty the vessel of his heart of all pride, all selfishness, all indifference. He must learn how to hold that vessel high, in pure and unconditional devotion, to be filled with the nectar of divine love. Only then, at the conclusion of his eons-long adventure, will he learn that God has always loved him. He may then hear those words, "You are dearly beloved by me." Not, please note, "I love you," with the personal ego-framed suggestion of an ego loved, but the more impersonal expression of love in which there is no separate individual reaching out with love toward another separate individual. And so, even though you could say it's only at the end of the journey that the soul begins to discover that it is loved by God this whole time. And if we are starting to discover that we have been loved by God the whole time, or we are hearing that, actually you've been loved by God the whole time, it implies that we are nearing the end of the journey. And that's the good news, because it's so nice to feel that we are nearing the end of the journey. But sometimes it's when you're almost at the end of the journey that the waiting becomes the most painful. I don't know if you've ever noticed in an airplane, and this did not happen to us, so I'm not bringing it up, but that you can be if you arrive at the airport at enough time that then the plane is, you arrive at the airport, there's all these delays, it's okay, you have a little, coffee or something, you get on the plane, they have to sit on the runway, but that's all right, you look out the window saying Pakalam to whatever city you're in, and then it finally takes off, and then it's about to land, and it says, oops, because of air traffic control, we have to circle one more time, and we think, well, I'm grateful for air traffic control, because otherwise we might land at the same time and end up going straight up to heaven again. So let's let the other planes land that are low on fuel. We can afford to loop around one more time. Then we land and they say, oops, sorry, we have to go to the farthest possible runway. And so, yeah, no problem. And then we stop and then they don't open the door. And we're sitting there for 45 seconds while the door has not been opened, or even 2 minutes, and it's just, get me out of this plane! And we had hours of delay, and no problem, but at that last moment when the door won't open, can't stand it. I have used this logic, saying, 2 more minutes on the runway, 2 more minutes in the air, I wouldn't have noticed, so why should I notice 2 more minutes now? Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't, because when we're just at the end, I need to go now, enough is enough. And that's how we feel on the spiritual path. That when we're starting to see the goal, but we see it's not quite within reach, that's when it can start to feel frustrating. Why? Partly because when you don't know there's a goal, you don't see it, we're just kind of walking around having a good time, and not in relation to anything. And so it's just like, well, you want to eat something? Sure, let's eat. And that's basically the whole lifetime, eating. And so only when we start to see, oh, exit. That's what I need. And then it's painful to have to wait at any time at all. So it's a dual blessing. But remember, God does love you. And that's the thing that's so funny sometimes. You see in people, and we see it in ourselves. Because God loves all equally. If we envy someone for what they have, or we feel a little hurt because we didn't get the friendship from somebody, or we didn't get the acknowledgement we felt we deserved, any kind of jealousy, it sort of implies that we think that there's only room for 5 people at God's table, and there's already 4 seats filled, and someone is reaching for the last one and will be left out. That there's not enough for me. And so I got to fight to get mine, so I make sure that I get it. There's enough for you. There's enough for every single one. Everyone has a seat at God's table, and no one can take yours. It has your name on it, and your Aadhaar number also, so to avoid any ambiguity. And so there's just no way. There's nothing to fear. Now, it sometimes is, though, that yes, but I want that also. Well, sometimes what we want isn't the best thing for us. Swamiji would tell the story of a saint that he knew who kept perpetual silence, but she had this ability that if she prayed for people for physical healing, they would always be healed. But her father was ill, and her mother naturally applied to the daughter, since, you're in the business of healing people, why don't you heal him? And the daughter refused. Without explanation. She just wrote sometimes. She would write little notes. She wrote no. And the mother kept after her, and the relatives kept after her. And finally the mother found an argument that trapped her. She said, you're not wanting to pray for him because you think that in healing your own father, you will be showing special favor to him. But don't you see that by choosing not to heal him because he's your own father, you're still showing that special favor? And furthermore, you don't want people to think less of you, to think that you're attached because you healed your own father. You're more attached to their good opinion than you are to just God's impersonal energy and so on. It sounded like a good argument. And as we say, even the devil quotes scripture. And so the daughter wrote finally, okay, but you will see what will happen. And so she prayed for the father, and the father got well. And then he left the family and began living just a dissolute, useless life. That disease was burning off that karma, was preventing him from fully acting on that temptation, and was probably clearing it from him. I mean, obviously a daughter would want to help her father spiritually. Anybody would want to help anyone else spiritually if they could. And who knows, maybe she was helping him in that. But when it was no, give him the physical healing, then it wasn't the best thing for him. And who knows if it added another round of whatever to his tab of karma. And so we have to trust in God, as Gyanamata said, that we cannot have another's portion, but we can have our own, and our own will surely come to us, which means that another cannot have your portion. There's nothing to worry about. I've seen it a lot. Someone got promoted and my friend didn't, and they were all upset because if you knew this person and how I actually did all of their work, but then they got all the credit, they got promoted and so on. We said, well, just, try more Hong Saw and something and try to, because she said, there's nothing I can do about it, but still. I said, well, if there's nothing you can do about it, you might as well just calm down. Because you're cooking yourself in this pot of emotions. And so she did calm down, and a little bit later she got promoted over that person. Because that person not doing the work perpetually was found out. And this person doing the work perpetually was also found out. And because also she was more even keel and not causing all kinds of warfare in the office, people said, thank you, you bring harmony, we need that. That's what we need in a leader. Not someone who says, see how well I am leading? Stop it, I'm talking. No, someone who tries to help the others to do their work. which is in fact what my friend was doing. And so keep these things in mind. God always makes it exciting. And as it says, as Swamiji says, terrifying. It has a happy ending. Krishna says, absorb yourself in me. Be wholly devoted to me. Worship and bow to me alone. So shall you undoubtedly reach me. This I promise you faithfully, for you are dear to me. Forsaking all other dharmas, duties, remember me alone. I will free you from all sin, even from that of not fulfilling outer, lesser duties. Do not grieve. And we saw this all the time, that as Krishna is saying to Arjuna, you are dear to me, he's not saying it just to Arjuna. You know, I think Nakula and Sahadeva were like, what about us also? Did he say, you are dear to me also? Everybody was dear to him. You know, Duryodhana was dear to him. Everybody is dear to him. And so we would see that sometimes with Master and with Swamiji, that people would sometimes feel like, oh, because he favored this one or he talked to this one instead of me, maybe he likes this one more. Or, you know, it was just people's own insecurities, or speaking personally, it was just my own insecurities projected onto Swamiji. It never was true. He loved all equally. Sometimes he related to different ones differently because that's what they needed. That's what would help them. But it was never the case that his heart was excluding one or another. His heart was big enough for all, because he was also acting as a channel of God's love. In a human way, we can only relate to so many people. There's only so many words you can say in a day. And if you have to split all those words up about every person, you would say, hello, how are you? I mean, everybody would just get one word. Because you can't spread it out in the same way to all. But God has given us some to interact with. We should be channels of His love to them. We should feel His love coming to us from them. And if it isn't easy to see how it is coming from them, except it's sort of love in the form of punches, then let's look for love coming to us from God in other ways. And sometimes it is only coming inside. Remember, we have that cup that God is filling with nectar. What is nectar? It is, what's the word I've just lost? Payasam. Payasam. That's, if you're ever wondering what's nectar, it's payasam. Pal payasam, probably. So it is Amrita. She's right. That's the real thing. But so is payasam. So we have our cups and they're full of payasam. And what do? We say, payasam enge. Payasam venum. And then you see someone else with their cup of payasam and you say, I want yours. We have our own right here. It's filled, overflowing. And so just take a sip in meditation, with kriya, with loving God, with chanting, with serving. Take a little sip. As Master said, be a spiritual alcoholic, a payasaholic. I just have it inside. Because that's where it's the most fulfilling. If we get it from outside, it dries up. You see, no one can be everything and to us. No one can fulfill everything. If only because then they move away or they die. And usually it's much bigger of a problem than that. And so we have our own cup, we have our own supply. And we have to look for it in here. We can be inspired by others, certainly. But it's reminding us to go within. Swamiji writes, man's highest duty is to love God. All Dharma serves the highest end of developing one-pointed, single-hearted devotion to and love for God, the supreme and finally the only beloved. We told the story earlier of how Krishna once asked Draupadi, why don't you practice the techniques of yoga meditation? Draupadi answered, I would love to, Lord, but how can I do so when I can't take my mind away from you long enough to practice them? Hearing her reply, we said, Krishna only smiled. This is what Krishna means here about lesser duties. Of course, the correct practice of yoga includes doing it with deep devotion. One should not take his mind away from God in order to practice it. Nevertheless, if the river of energy in the spine is flowing strongly upward through the heart to the brain, what further techniques are needed? Yoga techniques have the purpose of directing that energy upward for those who can be helped by that extra nudge. It's very sweet because, Swamiji was just a little extra nudge, just 108 kriyas, just a tiny, kuti little nudge. Just meditate 3 hours, just enough to get that energy going up the spine. It doesn't feel like a little extra nudge, but it is. You know how when a child is reaching for something and they can't reach and the parent just goes and hands it to them? Then, supposing it's Mysore-pak or something, then for the child it's, but for the parent they just had to, move the thing just 1 inch within reach. So easy too. And that's how it is for Divine Mother. She just gives us a little extra nudge. Oh, here you go. Here's a little illness for 10 years. Just a little extra nudge to burn off karma. Oh, here's financial ruin, just so you can become a little more detached. It's a little extra nudge towards me. And if we say, that was a big nudge, she can say, yes, think of how many nudges you've had over how many lifetimes. This is the 150th time you've had this same experience. Let's get it together. You see? So let's get it together in this lifetime. Never share these truths with one who is without self-control or devotion, Krishna says, nor with one who won't share with others in a spirit of service. Isn't that interesting? Don't share this with someone who won't share with others. It's amazing. And if we invert it, we say that if we don't share, then God doesn't share with us. Not out of punishment, but just because we're grasping, our hands are closed. I have to have mine. We won't share. Nor give them to one who is indifferent to them, or one who finds fault with me. Now this is interesting because this sloka is often misunderstood as do not share this with the unworthies or the impure or anyone who speaks against Hinduism. And it's ridiculous, but understandable how it could be seen that way superficially. Why does Krishna say this? One whose life has been changed by finding the truth, or even by finding the way of it, naturally longs to help others to find it also. He should reflect, however, that each one needs to come to it in his own way and at his own time. Out of respect for wherever others may be now in their spiritual evolution, one should not, as Jesus Christ put it, throw his pearls before swine. One who has no self-control, which is one thing Krishna mentions, may view as offensive any teaching that emphasizes self-control. That person isn't ready to face his weaknesses and may only reply, perhaps with resentment, now is not the time. They don't always say now is not the time. They say self-control, renunciation, and sannyas is for fourth ashram. It is for when you are 89 and a half years old. Then you can start meditation. Nevertheless, most people know in their hearts that lack of self-control has not given them fulfillment, but has only brought them suffering. Because of this very subconscious recognition, they may resent being given advice prematurely on the subject. And that word prematurely is key. Don't bother someone prematurely, because then they will be irritated, and then when you bring it up at the right time, they'll say, oh, shut up, you already said that. So don't bring it up when they're not ready. It will poison them, or not poison them, but bias them against it. One who has no devotion, whose heart's feelings are desiccated, which means dried up, who feels foolishly fully satisfied with himself, and who is accustomed to applaud such dry statements of the intellect as, just the facts, please, may sneer at any manifestation of devotional feeling that expresses a heartfelt aspiration toward higher truths. To him, such feelings are mere sentiment. Why offer a beautiful chalice filled with ambrosia to someone who will merely spit in it or throw it away? Those who serve no one, who share with no one, who, miser-like, try to hoard all their gains, their sympathies, their concern, which they lavish only on themselves, could never understand the selfless happiness of self-giving to others. And this you see all the time. When people give to others, especially when you're new on the path, the friends say, why do you torture yourself? Why do you deprive yourself? Why do you not, yes, you have to give to others maybe 1%, but the rest you should keep for your own pleasure. This is a false sense of self-punishment that you are engaging in. This is the kind of argument that is given falsely. Instead, their hearts shrink inward upon themselves, become dry shells of dead feeling, and turn angrily against anyone who suggests to them that they even consider the needs of others. Such people should be left alone. Unless one is blessed with great spiritual power to affect everyone's life for the better. So the first part is the advice we need right now. Leave them alone. Suffering alone in such cases will provide the rain to soften such hearts and make them ready to receive higher truths. There was a man like this. He was you've probably heard the story of someone asked Swamiji, do you think I need a guru? Very confrontationally. This was an Indian in Mumbai, I think, who asked him this question. And Swamiji said, of course you don't need a guru. Just unless you want to find God, then you need a guru. The man said, ha ha. Anyway, he was just not interested in any of this rubbish, and don't you come and tell me and all these things and so on. And so that's where the story ended for a time. But later, the man's wife became extremely ill. And then due to a mistake in the medication, she had a horrible experience in the hospital where she started to, well, it's kind of gruesome, but I'll just say she started to lose her skin. I won't go into it more detail than that.
Don't go into it.
But it was terrifying because it's terrifying even to talk about. And this man suddenly became a devotee. He began praying. He began asking for help. Because there was nothing he could do with all of his brains, with all of his money, he couldn't save her life. And it was the hospital itself at the time. She ended up getting better. That's a happy ending. But she was getting worse at that time. And people at Ananda, because his daughter was a devotee in a Kriyaban of Ananda, knew about this and were praying for her. And in addition to other prayers and God's love, she was saved. And so he suddenly found that there was a power bigger than his, that all of his own self-power wasn't worth anything around something he really cared about. And so that suffering opened him up a bit. And so that's what Swamiji means. I mean, that's an example of what Swamiji is saying, not what he means, what he said about suffering in such cases provides the rain to soften the heart, to make such people ready to receive higher truths. Many people are self-satisfied and simply don't want to hear about a better way of living and believing. Such people also must be left to their own devices until they themselves ask to receive more. And rather than thinking too much about, yes, I know such people, let's apply it to ourselves. Not with criticism, not with, oh, look how terrible I am, nothing like that. But are we just content with our current state of consciousness, with our current joy level? Let's ask for more. I was telling some of you this the other day. I had 3 little miracles in my life in rapid succession, and I needed a 4th, but I felt like I couldn't ask for it because I thought 3 was all I would get. And so we have to you can have 5 miracles. You can have as many as you need. So keep this in mind, that God is always loving you, always with you, always eager to give you more, including the gift of himself. God bless you.